crazy, but I didn't know he would.
How did it run after that, Cat?
It helped it. It didn't spin as much coming off the turn.
Welcome to another high-octane episode of Southern Dirt Motorsports.
The next car we've got is something that we all referred to in the day as a Skeeter. The first time I ever saw this car, I think it was Harold Fryer driving this car. I had never seen anything like it. And he had brought it to compete with cars like the previous car that we've just shown you, and it created a lot of controversy when this was taking place, because this car behind me is entirely a tube chassis. It weighs a lot less, although those old cars weren't heavy, it weighs a lot less than they weighed. It's sort of like taking a sprint car to a stock car race today. It would be a little uneven match. And anyway, there are some real, you could probably go a month on stories and the controversies that this one car created. Now, Harold Fryer was a pretty good sized guy, and one thing I remember about Harold driving the car, both his elbows stuck out on the outside of it. You could be behind it, and all you could see really was Harold's elbows sticking out from behind it. But it was quite a car. It was a fast car. It had a lot of innovations about it that came later on cars. It was leaf springs, but the way he had them arranged on the rear, they was almost like an independent suspension. So it had a lot of innovations to it. It was a truly fast car. And I'll let Roy tell you where he found it, the shape it was in when he did find it, and how he went about getting it to the place that it is today.
Well, this is where I bring my buddy in, Larry Ashford. I was trying my best to buy the 202 car off of Larry. He wouldn't turn loose of it, but in the meantime, he put me on this wing car. But we did not realize that this car was Harold Fryer's Skeeter until after we got it home. And there's a lot of things about this Skeeter that's just, it's unheard of as far as, in that day, as far as the racing. They cut the springs half in two and put wedge bolts on it, and it's only got a half spring under it. And the front end of it is the same way, where most axles are bolted solid. They put this one on a pivot point, and it pivots back and forth. It's got a sway bar under the rear of it. And when Larry kept telling me where this car was at, and I finally went up there and finally found the car, and got in contact with the son of the guy that had brought the car home, and bought it off of him. And my son and a friend of his went with me to get it. We were going to pick it up and slide it in the back of my truck. Well, guess what? We couldn't pick it up. We couldn't figure out why we couldn't pick it up. But we finally managed to get it up in the back of the truck. Well, I started on it. The gas tank was still in it. Well, I found why we couldn't pick it up. They had welded a piece of railroad arm that long in the gas tank.
That was a safety device.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was safety.
That was supposed to prevent the fuel tank from getting ruptured when somebody spit a drive shaft out in front of it.
Right. It still had the original in and out Anson gearbox in it. You push these things off and started them. They had magnetors on them, they had a battery in them. And but it's when I once found out it was Harold Fryer's Skeeter, then I went to the website and I looked at Harold's web page, and sure enough, it's Harold Skeeter, because when I started working on it, this door was all pushed down, and when we rolled the aluminum back up on it, it had 74 on it, Harold's number, and that was another indication we knew we had found Harold Skeeter. And when Harold and Freddie built these things, they built two Skeeters that was basically just alike, except Harold's had a round tube frame under it, Freddie's had a rectangular tube frame. And they done that to figure out which one worked the best, and then they followed that from that day on. I talked to a guy down in Georgia several years ago. His dad worked for Freddie and Harold Fryer, and he brought a bunch of pictures of the car and showed them to me, and it's just unbelievable that that I got the history of the Fryers. Unfortunately, we lost Harold in 1971 in Gadsden, Alabama, in a freak wreck. And I've heard, I seen Freddie 3 years ago against Nice Fairgrounds, and of course he's passed on since then. But he told me the story about how Harold got killed. He was in Birmingham running because he always said that Harold was a better driver than he was, and he said I have to run second to Harold if I followed him. So he said I went one way and Harold went the other one. But I'm just so fortunate to be able to say that I've got a piece of the Fryer history.
For all of y'all that can remember, Freddie became a real prominent racer in his own time. He raced, I know what we would call the Xfinity Series in NASCAR some, and he was a real prominent driver, a real good driver, and I guess the car that he was driving was about the only limits that he had. But both he and Harold were fine guys. I enjoyed being around them, and I feel so fortunate myself that I had a chance to meet them and actually race some with them. It's some of the happier days of my life. Now, if Gary will here, I know Gary can tell us about some of the controversies that this car caused. He might even, his dad might have even been involved in a little of it. So Gary, if you will, tell us,
step out here, Mr. Rowan.
Tell us a few of the stories.
If you'll look right here, this is the first car I've seen that this was a homemade car, but he was so far ahead of time. It's got a right steer on it. It steers off the right front wheel. Everybody else steers off the left front wheel. The springs is different on it. You can see right here. You can see it's got a half leaf on it with adjustment bolt in it right here. And like I said, he was actually ahead of his time, way ahead of the way it was built. And when he come to run, he was fast. And you was running an old coupe or sedan one. You had to be on your top A game to keep up. So it was at that time, it was the most modern car I ever seen.
Well, they took a 35 to 48 Ford steering box and turned it upside down to make it steer on this side. It's got a piece of pipe welded to the pitman where it would slide up on the steering shaft itself, and it sticks through the side of the car. And the whole purpose of it was where it would cut farther to the left. The tie rod end, the drag link wouldn't ride on the right wheel, the left wheel.
And it was more positive because we had always run the left steer on it. You got a tie rod end come across, and the right front wheel was bad to wobble on it. When you're tied over here with the steering, you're actually got positive steering over here on it.
Well, something else I run into when I started this car, it did take me about 2 days to figure out that it's shorter on the left side than it is on the right side. About 3 inches shorter. Because I kept trying to measure and get things back where it needed to go. And finally I figured out, hey, this bunch is shorting the frame up on the left side.
Well, that same technique is called crab walking in
NASCAR
nowadays, if they get caught at it.
Right.
I think they pretty much eliminated that on the bigger tracks now, but that was started back a lot of years. That's just another example of some things that was started back when we was having to learn what we was doing. But after this car showed up at the track at the first old McMinnville track, the one we referred to as the VFW track because it was located right across the river from the VFW. After Harold raced this car once or twice, the other competitors decided they weren't going to compete against it because they would have been competing for second place because it was so far ahead of its time and lighter than everything else. Roy does have one car that if it got in front of it could stay there, and we'll get around to that later on. It almost caused a strike at the racetrack one night with other drivers, and they tried to legalize the car, make it legal by putting that American body on it. They put a Crosley body on it for one night. Nobody bought that either. Too many holes you could see through. But anyway, it caused a lot of controversy. The stories could go on for a week that this car caused when it showed up at the old McMinnville Speedway.
Now, the last time I seen this thing run was at Winchester, and Carl and Jackie and them brought it down there, and they had a Corvair body.
The roll bar was still on top of the original cage where they mounted the Corvair body to it. Now, I've seen them at Winchester that night when they tried to run it.
And they are talking about Carl Yates and Jackie Grissom as the two drivers that they were talking about associated with this car later on.
Let me get a picture of what it was when I first brought it home. Unfortunately, this one didn't have a tree growth through it, but it was completely submerged in honeysuckles, salvars, and when we dropped the chain down through it,
he just thought it was a tree.
And drug it out. They was rattlesnakes and copperheads and everything else run out from under it. So this is what it looked like when it come home.
As you can see, Roy starts with very little left of it. Sometimes he does a lot of research, even down to the style of wing and stuff that it had on it. It makes great effort to make it back like it was when Harold and Freddie both were in it. And as you can tell, he does an outstanding job of it.
Right.
Now, if either one of y'all got any more stories you'd like to tell about this car?
You can always tell Harold was a big guy. When he had to hold that steering wheel, it was like it right there. That's the way he drove. And his arms stuck out, one on each side. So you could know when Harold was there.
You would think Harold was driving a tractor if you watched him drive it.
Well, what amazed me, and I got the steering wheel that came off the car. It's a big old, like a 50 model something Ford truck steering wheel. And you know, like you said, he was a big man. But it's amazing how he manages, because it's all I can do, and but I can't hardly get in and drive it. But it's amazing how big he was and how he squares down in that thing.
He was made to fit.
I think the car was made to fit him, not anybody else.
They probably set Harold down and formed the tubing around Harold and developed a car from that, because they're right. He did fit that car, and I mean, he fit it snug. He wasn't going anywhere if he wrecked it. He was too wedged in there. Now, you got anything else we'd like to share with us?
Now, I think the main Bill Rogers.
We hadn't really talked about this much about when Harold got killed. From what I was told, his girlfriend had this car in the basement, and Gary can help me out here a little bit because he knows more about the story than I do. All I know is Ed Rogers sponsored the car and Bill drove it. But now Gary's gonna tell you the story.
My dad and Paul Walker went to Chattanooga to look at the car. They were interested in buying it, and they went over to look at it, and they looked at it, and for some reason they didn't get together with the lady. They said this lady owned it, and they come back and they told Ed them about it, Ed Rogers about it. Well, it wasn't but a week later it showed up over here. So I think what was Bill and
Kokomo,
Sparta. They wound up getting it. It was always up there at Ed's. I thought maybe Ed had something to do with it, but I think he just sponsored it, didn't he?
Well, I think that's Mr. Ed Rogers spent a bunch of money.
He loved racing.
The man loved racing, and he spent a bunch of money helping the small-time operators try to make it big.
When you saw Ed's name on a car, it was usually a good running car.
And it was usually a good-looking car, because I've heard the story that he told Raymond Stiles, he said, if you tear the car up, don't worry about it. I've got a body shop. We'll make it slick again. And I guess probably Raymond Stiles probably had the slickest cars that really raced.
Yeah.
Besides the guys that came out of Nashville, Crash Bond and Mike Tony and
Griggs. Most times Griggs always kept a good, nice,
Jimmy Griggs,
good car.
and you know, the Nashville, and I've got good friends that restored the cars that run in Nashville after I got started, and their cars are slick. They're show cars. They're not really race cars. But like Randall said earlier, that one dent means something to somebody. So
you can tell these cars were really warriors. They've got the scars to prove that they were there, and one of us can figure out how most of them got there. So they're the real deal. The next car we're going to talk to you about, folks, is unique in lots of ways. In fact, I've got two guys here that's got lots of stories to tell about this car. But the one thing that I will share with you is the driver of Peanut. Peanut was the original builder of the first McNichol Speedway, the old VFW Speedway that we called it, located across from the VFW, and that's why his name is on there. Another unique thing about this, it's a real race car that has hubcaps on it, well, that were on there for a short while, very short while. But anyway, Gary will, I'll let Gary tell us a few things about the drivers and the colorful people that managed to get to drive this car.
I think they started out, they had an OZ2, which was an OZ4, and Bruno London, and I think drove both of them, best I remember, one back and forth, one way the other, because Pete Pearsall was in on it, and they worked on TVs, and that was a
radio tube.
A tube, yeah. That's what they put the number on. That's what they done, worked on TV stuff. Now George Holland owned this car, and built the car, and I've seen he's got a picture. Roy's got a picture where George's boy was in the car, and at that time they had hubcap on it.
1963.
And but anyway, the later on, Peanut Kenneth was his real name, but anyway, he started driving the car. Well, it was out. I hadn't seen it in years and years and years. They said it was sitting on swamp over it, but I went out there one day towards Smithville off Highway 56, and they was sitting on a trailer out there, and they wanted me to, of course, most times Roy finds something, somebody finds something, they want me to go look at it and see if I can identify the car, because I grew up with all these cars. I was right with them all the time. So I went out there, and it was so bad that hadn't been for the right front hub having yellow on it. You can see the yellow on there. I couldn't identify it, but I've never seen nobody else paint the frame and the hub that color yellow, so I thought that's OZ2. Then I looked on the left side over there, and they was running at Burgess Falls, and he got into the cross ties up there, and it rolled over on the left side, and there was where it hit the ground at over on the left top over there. So we identified that. Well, I come home, and that evening I called Peanut, and him and his wife went out there to look at it, and he called me back, and he said, I don't know if that's it or not, I don't remember it. And but anyhow, we found out that it was.
They run that Chrysler rear end, and from what I understand, they really never tore it up like the y'all were tearing the Banjo Fords up.
No, it was tough. It was a better rear end, and I don't understand why we all didn't run one of them, because it was lighter and it was a much better rear end. The axle was good. He never tore the rear end up.
This old car usually stayed together. You hardly ever saw it break down. It usually stayed together.
Let me tell you a story about this car. Sometime along there that we was at run, and we'd run it Cookville, and we'd run it Spartan around, and we was not at the McNichol Speedway every week because we was going somewhere else to run. He had to drove his car, and he'd run all year there, and it's the end of the year final championship there at the end of the year. So we went out there to run. Well, they said, you ain't got no points, you're going to have to go to the rear, which that was nothing unusual. So we'd start in the rear with our old car. And there was a bunch of cars there, and so they said, hey, he's won every race this year, said you're gonna have to get up there if you're gonna get to him. Well, so Dad got by him, got up there, and there's about 15 laps. They run a 50-lap race. There's 15, 20 laps, I guess, to run left when he finally got up to. Peanut was leading the race in this car. Well, he got upside of it, and they was bad because Peanut drove our old cars a lot and all. But they was always the best buddies in the world. But man, when he come to racing, the battle was on. It didn't make no difference. The friendship was
left in the garage.
Yeah, and then so every time he got upside of this car, they would go to bumping each other. They went down the back straight away, and they done this for lap after lap. The far and fly off the wheel just like it was a grinder on them. You know, like his every wheel running against each other. And it wore the wheels out on both of them. And they run like that for, I guess, like I said, at least 15 laps. The last lap on the last turn, my dad stayed on the outside all the time. He not always want to run on the inside. So they got faster and they got to make the turn, I guess, about wide open. Because anyway, he got to bouncing off of him, and they had bumped and the whole time. When he went to turn, about halfway through the turn, Peanut come up, which he'd been coming up and bumping him to go the other direction. And he just touched the brakes. Peanut missed him, and he cut the inside. And when they got to the flag, he only led about 60 foot, and we won the race there. And of course, they went on for years about that. You know, on and on about you took that away from me. And they just laughed and all. So the racetrack out there closed in 1967. That was the fall of '67. About 4 or 5 years ago, before Peanut passed away, one evening late, I got in and he called me. It was about dark. And he said, "Hey," he said, "I'm gonna tell you something." He said, "I was coming down the road to walk on," and he said, "They over cutting hay off that where the old racetrack used to be at." And he said, "He like never found out how to get in there. I finally went up top the hill and back down there and got down there." So I told them guys, he said, "Cutting that hay there," and he said, "They staying up hay." He said, I need to make a lap here on this." So he pulled down there with his truck. He made a lap to it. And he said, "Now you tell your old man," said, "He might have won the last race, but I made the last lap." So they lived a lifetime like this,
Right.
of guys each other. But anyhow, they was great friends. I mean, they was from beginning to end. They was always friends. Even when we went to the graveyard out there and at Martin Memorial out there, the Memorial Graveyard, they had Peanut's funeral there. So it was raining. Well, we waited around there and got out kind of and it slacked up a little bit. And it was in the circle there. So where Peanut was buried at, he's on the inside. So they walked over and looked at that. He turned around and he looked down on the other side. And they ain't 50 foot apart. But Dad's on the outside where their graves is at. And he said, he turned around and looked at me and he said, just like I always was, he's on the inside and I'm on the outside. So I've always said, if you go out to the graveyard and them wobbles is all rolled over in that circle, you probably know why.
Well, this car here, again, I'm going to mention Larry Ashford. Larry was putting cars on me to keep me from getting the 202 because I'd been on him for about 15 years about the 202. And he just wouldn't turn loose of it. So, over the period of years, I've had a lot of good help and I've had a lot of good friends that's give me parts. I had a guy, this is a 1949 216 Chevrolet motor, you know, and where are you going to find one at? Guy called me and he said, "Roy, I've got you a motor." He said, "All you got to do is take it out of a 2-ton truck. You can have it." He said, "It's running." So we brought the truck up here and I pulled the engine out of the tractor and the motor runs like a sewing machine. But like Randall said, I've got the original engine that came out of the car that sat down by the shop. And they had 2 carburetors on it. And they took water pipe nipples and welded to the intake. And there's a big chrome bumper bolt in the middle where they welded everything to. And I've laughed about that chrome bumper bolt being welded to that intake for the linkage to work off of. But all these guys they were just searching for anything and everything. And this car, the safety equipment is fantastic. It's got a boat gas tank in it. You know, I've seen U.S. military jerry cans, and I've heard and back in the day I have seen some boat gas tanks, but this one still had the original boat gas tank in it. It was all rusted out, but it was still strapped in it. So I spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 months flea marketing and yard selling, and I finally found another 5-gallon gas tank to go back in it. So
That was the gas tank of the day.
that was the gas tank of the day.
That was it. That was the safety. That was the
Now, what's
safety.
the, what model body is that?
It's a 36, right?
Somewhere along there.
36, 37 Chevrolet body. And here's a picture we were talking about a while ago with Jack Holland with hubcaps on it. Well, I've looked everywhere for these hubcaps. I've got friends that's beating the bushes trying to find them. And but that's a 1963, and that's a picture of Jack sitting in the car. And I got a friend that he buys and sells, and he brought me these spinner hubcaps, which back in the day, that's what everybody was running. So he said, put them on it. So that's how it went with hubcaps on it. Now, here we go. That's what it looked like when I brought it home.
And this was one of the better looking ones when he brought it home.
The worst thing we had with this one was there was a tree limb fell and it completely caved the back of the top down in the trunk.
I would just like to point out to the extent that Roy goes to make these cars look original like they did the last time anyone ever saw them on the racetrack. And there's lots of time and effort that goes into just that. And like I say, when he can find pictures to make them look just like they did, down to the decals, Roy does that.